of the FTA negotiations by the signing of a political document.
आज हमारे बीच 180 बिलियन यूरो का ट्रेड है। 8 लाख से अधिक भारतीय यूरोपियन यूनियन के देशों में रह रहे हैं और सक्रिय योगदान दे रहे हैं। हमने स्ट्रेटेजिक टेक्नोलॉजी से लेकर क्लीन एनर्जी, डिजिटल गवर्नेंस से लेकर डेवलपमेंट पार्टनरशिप, हर क्षेत्र में सहयोग के नए आयाम स्थापित किए हैं। आज ग्लोबल ऑर्डर में बड़ी उथल-पुथल है। ऐसे में भारत और यूरोपियन यूनियन की साझेदारी अंतर्राष्ट्रीय सिस्टम में स्थिरता को मजबूती देगी।
India has risen, and Europe is truly glad about it. Because when India succeeds, the world is more stable, more prosperous, and more secure. And we all benefit. Prime Minister, distinguished friend, we did it. We delivered the mother of all deals. We are creating a market of 2 billion people. And this is the tale of two giants, the world's second and fourth largest economies, two giants who choose partnership in a true win-win fashion. A strong message that cooperation is the best answer to global challenges.
It has a special meaning. I'm very proud of my roots in Goa. India is the world's fastest growing major economy. Trade has flowed between our two continents for centuries. And trade is crucial geopolitical stabilizer and the fundamental source of economic growth. Trade agreements reinforce rules-based economic order and promote shared prosperity.
Now let's put this into perspective. What are the sectors that will see a huge bump up as a result of this free trade agreement? It's going to supercharge some key industries. Apparel and textiles is going to get a big boost because import duties have been slashed from 12% to 0%. These are labor-intensive sectors. They've been hit hard because of the Trump tariffs. Leather and footwear too, in places like Agra, etc., will get sharper relief. Duties have been cut from 17% again down to 0%. So will electronics manufacturers, who will get a clear edge as the duties drop from 14% to 0%. These are all for Indian exporters who are exporting these products into the 27-member bloc, that is the European Union. Chemical imports will also get a clean slate, going from 12.5% down to just 0%. Plastics too, duties of up to 16.5% are now completely eliminated for the entire bloc of European nations. And for pharmaceuticals, which round out the list, the duties are cut from 11% to 0%. Particularly for generic drugs, this is again going to be a big boost to the Indian pharmaceutical sector. On the other side, what does India gain? What are the European imports that Indians can hope to pay less for? The FTA delivers something very real: lower prices on luxury items, whether it is high-end cars, motorcycles, even European wine and spirits over the next 10 years. French wine, for example, will see the steepest cut. Import duties have been slashed from a massive 150% down to just 20% for the premium range and 30% for the mid-range. Beer also gets cheaper, with duties reduced again from 110% down to just 50%. Everyday essentials are not left out either. Olive oil and other vegetable oils also will see duties that are slashed from 45% down to 0%. And processed foods will also get a clean break. Import duties of up to 50% are now completely removed on processed foods. Now, I spoke with the European Council President Antonio Costa on the eve of the signing and the announcement of this deal in an exclusive conversation, and I asked him to put this deal into context for our viewers, why this is such a big deal, why it's being called the mother of all deals. Here's an excerpt from that exclusive conversation.
First, this trade agreement is very important to boost our economies, but it's also a very important geopolitical stabilizer, because now the world is challenging by protectionism, by the rise of tariffs, and then it's important. to give to the world this message that these two largest economies, these two largest democracies in the world, we are upholding the rules-based trade order. And this is very important for the economy, because economy is very important, the predictability. The companies cannot work if they don't have predictability, and if they are always changing the rules, always changing the tariffs, always under threats of increased tariffs. This is very bad for economy. Then we need to create predictability, and is what we are providing to the European and to Indian companies, to businesses, is to provide predictability in our relationship.
Which are the industries you see from the Indian side which will be able to export much more to Europe, and vice versa? Which European industries you reckon will find this as a great opportunity to export to India?
Yes, this is the great chance for the Indian and for European companies to export more for our markets. The carbon mechanism
Tax,
is a mechanism to give an incentive to accelerate the transition, the energetic transition, and to reach our common goal and our common commitment to the Paris Agreement. And India is a key country and a very like-minded partner, and really committed with the Paris Agreement. And what we are doing with India is also cooperate on this energy transition. Of course, it's challenging in the country like India, of course, but we are working very well, very close to improve and to develop renewable energies and non-carbon energies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lang, for speaking with us here on News 18. The European Union is on the cusp of concluding this major trade agreement with India. It will be announced. In fact, it is the world's largest FTA, creating a combined market of 2 billion people with the fastest major growing economy in the world. It opens up this huge market to European people, to European companies. How and why is this agreement both for Delhi and for Brussels in your point of view?
This is really a significant trade agreement because, on the one hand, it is really stabilizing a rule-based trading system, which is under attack from several forces worldwide. And the two biggest economies, the European Union and India, are now working together based on rules. And secondly, it's really giving a big economic impact on both sides. So, of course, the tariffs will really decrease, but also services will be offered on both sides. So it is in support of the economic development on both sides, and this is needed in this really challenging times.
Mr. Lang, the negotiations for the India-EU FTA have been going on for almost 2 decades now. What, according to you, were the toughest red lines during these negotiations? We're also given to understand that sensitive sectors like agriculture, dairy, etc., which are sensitive both here in India as well as in Europe, may likely sort of be left out, or at least they would carve that out from the announcement. How does it ensure that these sensitive sectors are protected?
Of course, we recognize that we have some specific sensitive sectors on both sides, specifically in the field of agriculture. So I guess, for example, milk and milk powder will be excluded, and beef, for example, as well. But in principle, of course, also the agriculture sector is part of the agreement, but recognizing that there are specific sensitive areas. But this is not undermining the agreement. I guess this is also a clear signal of fair partnership.
But it's also coming, against the backdrop of massive global trade realignments that we're seeing with the tariffs. Why is this FTA such a strategic win? And it comes at a strategic time, both for Europe and India, at a time when the rest of the world is looking at stable, reliable markets, supply chains, and trade agreements.
we are sticking both to a rule-based trading system. We see that the rule of law is important for both, and this rule of strength is not our approach. We want to have real partnership. And therefore, sometimes, of course, also the agreement is asymmetric because India is on the developing way and they have a much higher GDP growth per year than the European Union. But that's okay because we want to have development which is going in a similar situation where the people on both sides have the possibility to create their livelihood on their own. So it is really supporting the economic and political development. So in this agreement, we have not only the rules of trade, but also rules regarding the acceptance of labor rights, of environmental standards, of the implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement. So it is really a book of fair partnership.
I also want to ask you, Mr. Lang, in what ways does this India-EU FTA, which is being touted as the mother of all deals, is it a sort of hedge, and how does it help sort of cushion the rising trade protectionism that we're seeing? How is it a hedge against rising, escalating U.S. tariffs and protectionism? Because, Mr. Trump has been threatening those against Europe as well, not just against India, which has not concluded the FTA with the U.S. yet, but even with Europe around Greenland. He threatened an extra 10% tariffs to walk back on them. How does this help in trying to cushion some of those blows?
Yeah, of course. Looking around, it's totally clear that at the end of the day, this unjustified policy of President Trump should not be really recognized by the rest of the world. And I guess it's totally clear that the trade volume of the United States is only around about 15% of global trade volume. And I guess the other countries are really now in the mood to join together and stabilize the system.
So the India-EU FTA, it's dubbed as the mother of all deals, Lisa. President Trump continues to threaten higher tariffs on India. The announcement today, how important is this, not just for India and for Europe, but in reshaping India's economic orientation?
Well, first, let me express my congratulations to the people of India on your Republic Day. It's an honor to be on the program on such an auspicious day. With regard to the India-EU trade deal that may be coming up, may be announced soon, I think that this will help give India some leverage in its trade talks with the United States, because what it will show is that India has other options, that Indian traders can export their goods to other nations. So this will, I think, help in terms of the direction of the U.S.-India trade talks, because it gives India some leverage. And also, I think another thing that is contributing to moving things forward with U.S.-India trade talks is the fact that India is, in fact, reducing its imports of Russian oil. There was a reduction last month in Indian imports of Russian oil. So I think, this will help with the U.S.-India trade talks.
I do want to ask you, Lisa, about
forward.
the appending of the global trading order with the Trump tariffs and so on and so forth. Every country has been affected. India's been affected as well. Has that now turned out to be a bit of a blessing in disguise, because it compelled both Delhi and Brussels to diversify their trade partnerships?
Well, I don't really see it that way, because I think India is a very important strategic partner for the United States. And I think that President Trump has mishandled the relationship with India on several fronts. I think on the trade front, I think slapping a strategic partner with 50% tariffs, some of the highest tariffs in the world, that is a mistake. I think India has been an important strategic partner of the United States, and that should not have happened. So I don't really see it as a blessing. I think it's a challenge that now we need to work toward relieving. I think the Trump administration should provide tariff relief to India. And I think it's time for the conclusion of a U.S.-India trade deal. But I think, that's a trade deal where both sides will have to compromise. And my understanding is that India has come forward with a good trade deal for the United States, that it has offered a lot, has put a lot on the table in that trade deal. So I think it's time to conclude that trade deal, and hopes are high that with Ambassador Sergio Gore now there in New Delhi in place, saying a lot of positive things about the U.S.-India relationship, that perhaps there will be a trade deal soon.
So, the one other thing, and this has been brought into sharp focus in the last 5 years or so since COVID, is that the world suddenly realized how much they're dependent on China for reliable supply chains. There was an over-dependence on China. So do you think the India-EU FTA will also reshape the Indo-Pacific supply chains, which are currently heavily leaning on China?
Well, I think it's important for the U.S. to continue to see India as a major trade and investment partner, and particularly when it comes to technology. I mean, we've seen U.S. firms investing in India's AI sector in terms of data centers. And so clearly, U.S. companies see very much an opportunity and the future of technology in India, and see India as an alternative supply chain for technology. So there's lots of room for U.S.-India continued cooperation when it comes to technology and AI. And I think, that will continue. So I think it's up to the Trump administration to recognize that, to recognize all the opportunities, and that India is important when you're talking about developing alternative supply chains to China.
I want to talk a little bit about China because, India also has a substantial trade relationship with China, again, over $100 billion. There are only three trading blocks that India does over $100 billion trade with. One is China, the United States, and of course, Europe. But it's heavily skewed in China's favor. There's a massive trade deficit as far as India is concerned. Will the India-EU FTA also help increase or the opening up of Indian exports into China, forcing Beijing to import more from India?
Well, again, I think if the India-EU free trade agreement is made, as we're all expecting, then I think that does give India more leverage in all of its trading relationships, whether it's the U.S., China, or any other country. So it gives India options. It shows that India is a global player, an important market, and I think it kind of helps its overall trade outlook. So I think that, we can see this as an accomplishment for India and its trade agenda. Of course, there have been concerns that President Trump will somehow be mad about the India-EU free trade agreement.
I want to go across to Michael Kugelman, Senior South Asia Analyst, Senior Fellow, in fact, with the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much, Michael, for speaking with us. So India and the EU have announced this massive FTA. It's the world's biggest FTA. It will cover 2 billion people, a quarter of the world's GDP, a third of the world's trade. At a time when we're seeing rising trade protectionism and tariffs, and India and the US have not concluded their bilateral trade agreement, what is the signaling by both Brussels and by Delhi?
Well, I mean, this is, of course, a deal that had been in the works for many years, but I think that it's taken on so much added significance given what's happened in the year since Donald Trump returned to power. And I think that we've seen some indications that India is prepared to pull back from its relationship with the U.S. and look to other options, at least in the context of commercial ties. And clearly, the EU is a very useful workaround for India as it looks to recover from the shock of facing 50% tariffs from one of its most important export markets. I don't think that this deal with the EU will necessarily impact India's relationship with the US in a big way, but I do think it's an indication that India is prepared to look elsewhere, at least for now, as it looks for ways to ensure that its economic interests continue to be addressed at a moment when it's facing these very high tariffs from the United States.
So in the last 4 years, and I keep going back to this, I think COVID was the big marker. Post-COVID, in the last 4 years, India has had, I think including this one, 9 FTAs with New Zealand, with the UAE. The EFTA got agreed upon a few months ago, and now, of course, the mother of all deals, as it's called, the India-EU FTA. How much does that increase India's leverage in other ongoing trade negotiations, whether it's with the US, with Southeast Asian countries, Australia, etc.?
Ordinarily I would say yes, but this is a very unusual and unconventional administration that you're looking at in Washington. And I do think that for there to be a deal with the United States, India will need to make more concessions. The U.S. negotiators have taken a very hard line, and I think that they'll continue to insist that India do certain things, such as opening up its most politically sensitive sectors like agriculture. I think those demands will continue from the U.S., regardless of what India might be doing with other key trade partners, including the EU. And of course, this is a challenge for India because India has made a number of concessions to the U.S. during earlier periods in the negotiations, and India, very understandably, has held back from making these other concessions that the U.S. has been demanding it make. So I think that these are two separate tracks. I mean, what you're seeing with the EU and India with a deal coming very soon, that's playing out on a separate track from whatever might be happening and what might come in the weeks ahead with U.S.-India trade negotiations.
So it's not just trade. Obviously, trade has captured all the headlines because of the sheer scale of this deal. But the other agreements that have been signed are pretty significant too, particularly the one on defense and security cooperation, at a time when you're seeing this whole spheres of influence sort of idea. Trump wants to focus America's energies, its resources on the Western Hemisphere. China seems to be developing its own sphere of influence here in Asia. Do you think India and the EU, announcing this defense and security partnership agreement today, will send out a very clear signal for countries in the Indo-Pacific?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the big trends that's playing out in geopolitics right now, that many of America's closest partners, including trade partners, are essentially recalibrating and looking elsewhere because of the Trump administration tariff policy and just because of all the unpredictability and volatility that marks the Trump administration. So you're absolutely right. I do expect that India and other close partners of the U.S., at least for now, are going to look to expand their partnerships with other places and other spaces, and not just in a commercial sense. Now, I would say that there might be a challenge for India and the EU and other European countries when it comes to the issue of Russia. I mean, my understanding is that a number of the EU capitals have not been happy with the position that India has taken vis-a-vis the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Clearly, the Russia factor has not impinged on the India-EU trade negotiations, and I don't think that it will prevent India and the EU from moving closer in other spaces too. But, there are still some areas of divergence. And I think that more broadly than that, even in the trade talks between India and the EU, and there's some fundamental differences, one of them being intellectual property issues. This is something that moving forward, the two sides are going to have to work through because, I think differences on intellectual property can get in the way of forging deeper cooperation in areas like tech and innovation. So that's something to watch for too.
I also want to get your thoughts on, again, I go back to the post-COVID era that we're living in. That's when countries started realizing the over-reliance and the over-dependence on China for supply chains. And the US has been talking about this, Europe has been talking about this, about diversifying supply chains. So this deal that's been announced today, how much does it help in strategic positioning that India is an alternative, at least in some measure, to being an alternative supply chain nodal country for global electronics manufacturing, automobile manufacturing? We've seen China use its leverage on supply chains, almost like a weapon in trade. As the global supply chains shift away from China, does this deal help strategically position India as an alternative when it comes to diversifying supply chains?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about workarounds that India has looked to focus on in light of these high tariffs from the U.S. and the EU trade deal is one of them, and I think also this effort to try to ease tensions with China to a degree to create more diplomatic and political space for expanding what is already a fairly robust commercial relationship with China. This is definitely something to look at. But my sense is that there are limits to how far New Delhi would want to go with Beijing. Yes, there are some indications that there might be fewer constraints regarding new Chinese FDI coming to India as part of this broader effort on the part of New Delhi to try to ease tensions to a degree with China. But at the end of the day, India and China continue to be competitors and rivals in a very fundamental sense. They continue to have a disputed border. China's close alliance with Pakistan is clearly something that will make it difficult for India and China to build more trust. So, yeah, I think that if we look at how this India-EU relationship could proceed, there's a very strong shared interest there in countering China. And I think that for the Europeans, one of the advantages of this trade deal with India is that it could make it easier for the EU to reduce its reliance on China and China's economy. China's economy has a tremendous amount of global leverage, but I do think that for the Europeans, the hope is that by working more closely with India, they could perhaps undercut that leverage, even if just a bit. And I think it's the same for India as well. I mean, by partnering commercially with the EU in a big way, it may fortify or strengthen India's capacity to push back more against China and the economic steps that it takes to try to bolster its economic clout in the world.
All right, Michael Kugelman, Senior Fellow with the Atlantic Council, thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18.
The visuals say it all. The Prime Minister and the two principals from the European Union joining hands and raising them in triumph. Von der Leyen on his left, Costa to his right. The so-called mother of all trade deals is a coming together of 2 billion people representing 25% of global GDP and a third of global trade. When viewed in terms of GDP purchasing power parity or PPP, the numbers stand out even more starkly. India's GDP PPP is $17.7 trillion. EU's GDP PPP is $29 trillion. That's more than China at $41 trillion or the United States at $30.6 trillion. It is not just trade. India and the EU or the European Union have also entered into a security and defense strategic partnership. But there is something Prime Minister Modi and EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen won't admit to in public. The fact that India and the EU deal will strengthen and diversify critical chains, supply chains in clean tech, pharma and semiconductors by reducing over-dependence on the United States and China. And the reason they won't want to say this aloud, viewers, is because they don't want a backlash. In a world disrupted by Donald Trump's trade tyranny and China's robber baron approach to commerce, this, however, this pivot away from the two is a welcome reassertion of strategic autonomy which won't go unnoticed in DC or BJ. While this deal paves the way for both signatories to Trump, mind the pun, the current global trade tyranny, let's not forget that Europe has kept India waiting for almost 2 decades, viewers, refusing to meet India halfway, haughtily adopting a take it or leave it attitude. The deal, therefore, is also a signal that Europe, and therefore a large part of the West, is realizing its own limitations. That it is no longer convinced that it can set the terms. There's no denying that the world order has pivoted a bit today. away from the West and pointedly towards India in the East. All those people, viewers, who talk about dead economy India, flatlining economy India, India in disarray, etc., take note. India's rising influence has also meant that the deal has been concluded with Delhi eyeing big plus points. And let me break it down for you. Why is India at this moment satisfied to the point of, some people say, smugness about this deal? Because it breaks dependencies, diversifies supply chains, reducing reliance on US and China. It provides a bloc-wide access to all 27 EU nations, unlike bilateral FTAs. Symbolic booster for India. Delhi emerges as a strategic hub, a major job creation, 8 to 10 million in India itself, 1 or 2 million in the EU. And India's 9th FTA in 4 years, reflecting aggressive trade diplomacy and, of course, the acceptance of this nation. Access, viewers, to EU markets, boost exports, investment and tech inflows, gateway to deeper cooperation in technology, climate and defense. Viewers, getting into details, and India will be happy with the fact that on several of its sectoral exports, the EU has decided to waive duties. It's a massive win. No duty on 90.7% of India's exports. Zero duty over 3 to 5 years for 2.9% of exports. Preferential access to 6% of exports. On the other hand, Europe also comes away feeling vindicated by going ahead with this. No duty on 49.6% of tariff lines immediately. No duty on 39.5% of tariff lines over 3 to 5 years. 3% products under phase reductions. All this means that specific labor-intensive sectors in India hit by US tariffs can expect to gain access to EU consumers and therefore make up for the ill fortune that hit them. And I'm talking about, viewers, the apparel and textile sector. Earlier 12%, now 0% duties. Leather and footwear, earlier 17%, now 0%. Electronics, earlier 14%, now 0%. Chemicals, earlier 12.8%, now 0%. Plastics, earlier up to 16.5%, now 0%. Pharmaceuticals, earlier 11%, now 0%. All of these will be immediately competitive in the European market. For Indian consumers, there are also some big wins. Luxury gets cheaper. And all those facts are up on your screens. Luxury gets cheaper. Wine, earlier 150% taxes, now 20%, viewers. All those duties will come down on imports. 30% premium beer. There you can see it. 110 earlier, now 50%. Olive and vegetable oils, earlier up to 45%, now 0%, so you can purchase some of this. Processed foods, earlier 50%, now 0%. The deal hasn't gone unnoticed, let me tell you, viewers, in the United States, or for that matter in China. In DC, aware that US leverage over Delhi will shrink, US Trade Secretary didn't seem very pleased. Interestingly, he reserved most of his ire for Europe. Beijing, though muted, will be ruining an arrangement in which Europe's dependency on it will decrease. Let's open this up, because at the end of the day, viewers, we must get a fair assessment from our panel on whether this is actually going to be what it is being drummed up to be, a win-win. And I'm only specifically concerned about India here, viewers. Did we fight our case hard enough? Have we succumbed and not got enough? All these questions can be asked. The numbers are looking very good. And I want to first begin with Ajay Srivastava, founder of Global Trade Research Initiative, GTRI, who has the numbers tips of his fingers. So, Mr. Srivastava, how do you see this deal from a purely financial and trade point of view? specifically with regards to India? Have our interests been protected or have we given away too much?
Rahul, the best part of this deal, which is not talked about enough, is that we, India and EU, stand at different level of value chains. What we produce, they don't produce. So there is no competition. So there is no local industry suffering in most of the products. For example, we export garments and shoes. We export mobile phones. They don't do all these things. They buy these things from other countries. They produce electronic equipments which we can buy and use in making smartphones and cutting reliance on China. Similarly, they are into high-end machinery, aircraft. We are nowhere there. So the point is, there is no competition. There is no local industry suffering. That's point number one. And second is, when EU is a big market with 450 million rich consumers, when the tariffs on our labor-intensive goods like textiles and garments and leather goes down, say from 8% to 20%, there will be big rise in the exports of these products. And these products suffered the most in the US in the past few months. And currently our exports were not up to the mark in these product groups because they were getting disadvantaged by the zero tariff access to Vietnam or Bangladesh. Now with the zero tariff access to EU market, will be at par with them and our exports is bound to rise. But of course, only after the agreement is implemented, that may take more than 1 year.
But let me ask you specifically, what happens to the Indian car sector? You've seen some of those duty reductions. Their cars will be available in India. Many people have said that our automobile sector has been too protected. Does this expose it very quickly? And have they been caught off guard? Will they be able to sort of compete when these cars come crowding in? I know India is a price-sensitive market, but explain to me, have we diluted our own protectionist stance?
I don't agree with this assertion. You know, we see BMWs and Mercedes on Indian roads. How they come to India? They don't pay full tariffs. They come into semi-knockdown conditions where duty is not 100% but 30%. They come into completely knockdown conditions where these are assembled here, screwdriver assembly, where they pay only 15% tariffs. So my sense is most of these low value add operations in India will no more be there. And instead of that, the cars will be directly imported into India, which means number-wise, there will not be a substantial increase in the number of cars from EU. So the fears that it will be swamping our domestic market are totally unfounded.
What about some of the other sectors? We've seen duties reduced there also. Processed foods, this, that, the other. India is trying to build its agri sector, sir.
So we are competitive in processed food sector. EU provides very high-end luxurious processed foods like chocolates or biscuits or whatever we say. They are high-end materials. They have a different segment, which is 5 to 10% of Indian consumption. I don't think they are going to compete with Indian mass products. And in fact, they'll be providing a little competition to our high-end products, and that will help us in improving the quality. I see it as a positive development.
Also,
the problem,
go ahead.
The problem is, if we have opened, like US was asking to open grain sector, we have not opened. We will not open because livelihood of 700 million people depends on that. So with EU, no such openings.
Okay, let me bring in Mr. Kanwal Sibal. Mr. Kanwal Sibal, that's a report card from the trade point of view, and our expert is the best in the business, so he's giving us that breakdown. But Mr. Kanwal Sibal, look, at the end of the day, we are de-risking in a way, diversifying. Has this deal allowed Delhi to increase its leverage upon DC? I saw the remarks in the morning of Mr. Besant. He's not very happy. You've seen his sort of sarcastic tweet against Europe. So clearly there's some consternation, but will that translate into leverage? Does Delhi now have a little bit of leverage with DC? How does this play out?
I think so. It does. Because the United States have indicated that they are in no hurry to do a trade deal with India. They've not removed those 50% tariffs on us. In fact, Besant has been chiding Europe that it did not follow its policy of punishing India with tariffs because we were buying Russian oil. And instead, they wanted a trade deal with India, and therefore, they have been soft on India. This is what he's trying to say. Clearly, therefore, they're not happy that Europe has, in a sense, gone behind the back of the United States and done Cavalier Searle in signing this trade agreement or agreeing to this trade agreement with India. Yes, definitely it does, and in fact, it exposes the hollowness and the ineffectiveness of Trump's tariff policies towards India, because it has not only deterred, in fact, it has incentivized Europe to quickly do a deal with India, because Europe also wants to expand its options. They are now smarting under the kind of sanctions, under the kind of pressures that they have received from the United States, very open pressures. Trump, as you know, have been inveighing against the EU as such. He wants the EU to be broken up, and he wants to impose so much economic pressure in various ways on Europe, so as to, in a sense, retard Europe's economic progress and put Europe on a difficult footing with regard to.
So let me ask you, Mr. Sibal, has Prime Minister Modi, in a sense, and I'm now using this as a pun, trumped trade tyranny? Have we got out of the cul-de-sac that we found ourselves in?
I won't put it that way, because we still should have interest in finalizing a trade deal with the United States. Europe, of course, is a very big partner, almost as big a partner or economic partner of India as the United States. But the United States is a huge, huge partner. And if you combine goods and services, they are probably larger than Europe. So therefore, there's no sense in turning our back on such a large market, which has also great potential in terms of possibilities for the future. After all, we signed an agreement with them that we will increase our bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030. That goal may not be reached, but nevertheless, this is the kind of target we had in mind. And then in terms of technology transfers and other things, United States is very, very important for us. Europe can step in, but not to the same degree as United States can. And you see, the thing that we must take on board is that while we sign all this with the EU, when it comes to technology and this and that, individual national governments will make decisions. When you get into vital sectors, artificial intelligence or defense or whatever it is not Brussels that's going to decide alone. But you know, they may have regulations, they may have budgetary support, but importance to this deal with the EU, as if this is going to cover all the areas of our interest and go beyond what we are trying to do individually with Germany or France or other countries. That exercise will continue to be done, because there are things on which the national governments have the last say.
Okay, but Dr. Ranganathan, what we now know is that India is a great bet. I know this has come a decade and a half too late, and it's probably also come because the West has also realized that, look, they are not the only kid on the block, and that they actually have realized and assessed their own limitations. So it's a humbling, it's a chastened Europe, but it does say so much about our country.
No, absolutely, Rahul. Good evening to you and to my fellow panelists. To exemplify what you've said, last year saw India's highest ever GST collection, $270 billion, highest ever vehicle sales, 25 million, highest number of taxpayers, 104 million, manufacturing PMI, highest ever, 59.2, highest ever exports, $825 billion, highest ever jobs created, 46 million, highest ever Forex reserve, 705 billion, highest ever Sensex, 86,000. Rahul Gandhi may believe that this is the hallmark of a dead economy, but Europe clearly doesn't. And just the right time, therefore, to sign the mother of all trade deals and taunt the father of all shady deals. Look, congratulations to everyone involved in this. It really is. I mean, it's really amazing. But there is euphoria, perhaps justifiably so. But let us not forget that this, and I speak as a layman out here, that this is exactly how economics and trade must operate at all times. You know, to paraphrase Orwell, when he said, in times of universal deceit, even speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. So in times of Trump, even reaching a tariff-less trade deal is a revolutionary act. Yeah, Rahul, look, I remain an advocate for free trade because I know that this is the only way of eradicating poverty and making humanity more prosperous and equal. And so I'm fundamentally against high tariffs and quotas and duties. They encourage protectionism and license raj. They help in the short run because through protectionism and high tariffs, you create more jobs, more domestic growth and setting up of factories and lower imports. But in the long run, protectionism and high tariffs result in what they've always resulted in, a socialist trap that ultimately destroys a country's economy through less choice for consumers, outdated technology, increasing friction with countries and higher prices because of lack of competition and rule of monopoly. Remember Ambassador cars and Campa Cola? Do we want to return there? Protectionism is against Darwinian evolution, whose overarching fundamental is spirit of competition enabling survival of the fittest. That said, in taking to the spirit of competition in free trade, one cannot allow unfair trade practices and dumping of goods by dictatorships. So I think Modi did great when he did to pull out of RCEP. Effectively, that was a free trade agreement with China, a known currency manipulator that props up its companies underhand, indulging in unfair trade practices. On the other hand, Modi has done great to enter into an FTA with the UK, a democracy, and now with EU. The ultimate goal, Rahul, is a level and free playing field that encourages competition, respects and rewards intellectual property, and gives consumer a choice at reasonable cost. Just 30 seconds. Free markets and free trade is the best arbiter. Did you know, for example, that Japan does not impose any tariffs or duties on American cars? Because Japanese don't want to buy American cars as they are not as good as non-American cars. In fact, it is America that imposes tariffs on Japanese car makers, and yet Japanese car makers have roughly the same market share as American car makers in America. Protectionism is bad. Darwin said so, and Darwin is always right.
So how does this, Mr. Ajay Srivastava, also sit with India's own push towards Atmanirbharta? There are going to be other trade deals, and Dr. Ranganathan, of course, says that protectionism is the problem. It's not the solution. However, to be competitive, our industries would require a little bit of support, would they not? Or do you think that time has come and gone, that we can compete?
In fact, there are both the two types of examples. For example, in 1980s, Australia has 10 car making companies, and 90% of the cars in Australian roads, they were Australian made. Then, and the tariff protection was 45%. Then they brought down the tariff from 45% to 5% in the next 10 years, and all the 10 disappeared because dumping started from Europe, from China, from Japan, and everywhere. Right now, there is not a single car maker there. Australian government is desperate to invite some of them, offering subsidies and free land and power. Nobody is coming. So our car sector, pharma sectors, two most vibrant sectors, they are based on the protection. But I agree with Mr. Ranganathan partly that we can lower the import tariffs and other restrictions like QCOs, but at the same time we have to do cleaning up of our regulation. If we lower the tariffs alone and keep the regulations complex, then local competition will never shape up. So for shaping up, we need to work on both. Import duties are highly visible. So we say, okay, remove this and we will benefit. No, not at all. If we remove the import duties without simplifying the regulations, we will be swamped by the imports.
Okay, Doctor, very quickly before I bring in Mr. Andrews.
No, absolutely. In fact, I didn't have time to elaborate on this. You are absolutely right, sir. Both must go hand in hand. I mean, you can remove the tariffs, but right now, Indian companies face 69,000 compliances. An MSME that employs an average of 150 employees spends on average 18 lakhs a year in just filing compliances. So yes, we have to unshackle on our own accord as well. That goes hand in hand.
That's why this budget, viewers, is instrumental. Can it prepare us for this very, very unpredictable external environment, economic environment specifically. That's why all eyes will be on Nirmala Sitharaman. Now, I want to bring in Mr. Andrews, Barry Andrews. He's a member of the European Parliament, or an MEP. Mr. Andrews, thank you for speaking to us. Now, I want to ask you very straight off. This isn't just about trade, is it? There's a lot more packed into this.
No, it's really a remarkable deal in terms of scale. It's taken an awful long time to come to the signing that's taking place today. And it does go beyond trade to try to encourage investment, especially from Europe into India. It's very much about integrating Indian manufacturing into global supply chains. And there's also labor mobility elements to it. And yesterday, we also had a security agreement between the European Union and India. So it's very broad-ranging and very, very welcome in these turbulent times geopolitically and indeed for international trade.
Well, implicit in your response is an acknowledgement that diversification helps the EU, specifically at this time, this very troubled, roiled time. By lessening its dependence on, for example, the US and China, and therefore gives perhaps even Brussels greater leverage. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, I think that it seems to be the policy of the United States to really disregard the established rules of international trade. So the European Union and India recognize like-minded approaches to international trade. And so the more that we can create these kind of standards in international trade that can be maintained, then it can be used as leverage. Let's not forget this trade agreement that was signed today, if and when ratified, will cover 2 billion people across the planet. It's the biggest trade deal that has ever been signed. It will cover 25% of global GDP. And surely this is the kind of leverage that both India and the European Union has ambition to achieve as regards the larger powers, the United States and China.
Okay, let me ask you, it's taken more than a decade and a half. Is this because the EU has also recognized its own limitations in a multipolar world, sir? Is this also a slight humbling of the EU? It's chastening, it's realized that, look, yes, well, we don't quite now, command the respect that we did at one time, or let's say the influence.
Look, I think, Rahul, that's a reasonable analysis of what's happened, that the European Union is certainly demonstrating greater flexibility, shall we say, in the new context. There's no doubt that the European economy relative to the global economy is smaller than it was. I think it's also important to note that India is growing exponentially in the last couple of decades in particular, and is expected to be the third largest economy in the world. But we shouldn't forget also that India comes to these negotiations with more flexibility as well, because obviously India has suffered the imposition of 50% tariffs from the United States. Maybe they will be unwound under negotiation. But I think my conclusion is to say, yes, the European Union has been more flexible, but also I think India has been more flexible with the overall result that we've had this incredible scale of a trade agreement signed today.
Kamal Sibal, let me come back to you one final time. I want to ask you this. How do you think the United States is going to respond? Do you think this will sort of inject a sense of urgency in DC to get this deal with India done? Perhaps drop some of its standards, certainly its illusions and delusions?
I'm not too sure whether this is a point of pressure to the degree that you have indicated. Now, whether after they succeed partially or otherwise in finding some kind of a way out of the Ukraine conflict, and then start directly negotiating with Russia, which they are doing on a separate track, to get access to the Russian market and do business deals with them, then it'll become more and more irrational on their part to maintain the extra 25% penalty tariffs on India because we buy Russian oil. So that kind of contradiction will begin staring in the face of the American decision makers. But I don't think this will be. This is going to be linked to the fact that we have signed or we have agreed on a trade deal with the
Well,
Europe.
I can tell you, viewers, I can certainly tell you that the US is jumpy. Now, whether that translates into scorn, further derision, or it'll sort of inject a sense of urgency, we don't know. Nothing can be said about Donald Trump. I just want to move on. I'm sorry, I'm just going to move on because there are other stories.
Competitive liberalization. And just to take another example, we started negotiating a trade deal with Korea, not because
President of the European Council, Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Shri Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of the Republic of Bharat, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I welcome you all to this ceremony where we shall witness exchange of several agreements and MOUs. These documents reflect the wide-ranging, multifaceted bilateral cooperation as part of the India-EU strategic cooperation, a strategic partnership. We will begin with the signing and exchange of political declaration on conclusion of negotiations of the India-EU Free Trade Agreement. This document will be signed by His Excellency Mr. Maros Sefcovic, European Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, and Shri Piyush Goyal, Minister of Commerce and Industry of India.
I think we can.
The next document to be signed is the India-EU Security and Defense Partnership. This document will be signed by Her Excellency Ms. Kaya Kallas, High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and the Vice President of the European Commission, and Dr. S. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister of India. We now have the signing of the Comprehensive Framework on Cooperation on Mobility. This document will be signed by His Excellency Mr. Maros Sefcovic, European Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, and Dr. S. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister of India. A few documents will now be exchanged. The Administrative Arrangement on Cooperation and Disaster Risk Management will be exchanged between His Excellency Mr. Hervé Delphin, EU Ambassador to India, and Shri Vikram Misri, Foreign Secretary of India. The The agreement on constitution of a green hydrogen task force will be exchanged between His Excellency Mr. Hervé Delphin, EU Ambassador to India, and Sri C.B. George, Secretary West in the Ministry of External Affairs. Lastly, two documents, namely the MOU between the Reserve Bank of India and the European Securities and Market Authority, and the administrative arrangement on advanced electronic seals and signatures, will be exchanged between His Excellency Mr. Hervé Delphin, EU Ambassador to India, and Sri Saurabh Kumar, Ambassador of India in Brussels. Before I conclude this segment on exchange ceremony, I would also like to announce that India and the European Union have agreed on a strategy document titled Towards 2030, a joint India-European Union comprehensive strategic agenda. I now request the spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs to conduct the rest of the proceedings.
Good afternoon, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, and Her Excellency Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, Honorable Ministers, members of both delegations, distinguished guests, and friends from the media. We will now have the press statements. May I request Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi to give his remarks to the media.
Your Excellencies, President Antonio Costa, our President Ursula von der Leyen, दोनों देशों के डेलीगेट्स, मीडिया के साथियों, नमस्कार। अपने दो करीबी मित्रों, प्रेसिडेंट कोस्टा और प्रेसिडेंट von der Leyen का इस अभूतपूर्व भारत यात्रा में स्वागत करते हुए मुझे बहुत खुशी हो रही है। कोस्टा जी अपनी सरल जीवन शैली और समाज के प्रति प्रेम के आधार पर लिस्बन के गांधी के नाम से जाने जाते हैं और उर्सुला जी जर्मनी की पहली महिला रक्षा मंत्री नहीं, यूरोपियन यूनियन कमीशन की भी पहली महिला प्रेसिडेंट बनकर पूरी दुनिया के लिए एक प्रेरणा है। कल एक ऐतिहासिक क्षण था जब पहली बार यूरोपियन यूनियन के लीडर्स भारत के गणतंत्र दिवस समारोह में मुख्य अतिथि के रूप में शामिल हुए। आज एक और ऐतिहासिक अवसर है जब विश्व की दो सबसे बड़ी लोकतांत्रिक शक्तियां अपने संबंधों में एक निर्णायक अध्याय जोड़ रही है। फ्रेंड्स, पिछले कुछ वर्षों में भारत और यूरोपियन यूनियन के संबंधों में उल्लेखनीय प्रगति हुई है। साझा लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों, आर्थिक सिनर्जी और मजबूत पीपल टू पीपल टाइज के आधार पर हमारी साझेदारी नई ऊंचाइयों तक पहुंच रही है। आज हमारे बीच 180 बिलियन यूरो का ट्रेड है। 8 लाख से अधिक भारतीय यूरोपियन यूनियन के देशों में रह रहे हैं और सक्रिय योगदान दे रहे हैं। हमने स्ट्रेटेजिक टेक्नोलॉजी से लेकर क्लीन एनर्जी, डिजिटल गवर्नेंस से लेकर डेवलपमेंट पार्टनरशिप, हर क्षेत्र में सहयोग के नए आयाम स्थापित किए हैं। इन्हीं उपलब्धियों के आधार पर आज की समिट में हमने समाज के सभी वर्गों को लाभ पहुंचाने वाले कई निर्णय लिए हैं। फ्रेंड्स, आज भारत ने अपने इतिहास का अब तक का सबसे बड़ा फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट संपन्न किया है। आज 27 तारीख है। ये सुखद संयोग है कि आज ही के दिन यूरोपियन यूनियन के 27 देशों के साथ भारत ये एफटीए कर रहा है। यह एक ऐतिहासिक समझौता हमारे किसानों, हमारे छोटे उद्योगों, इसके यूरोपियन मार्केट तक पहुंच आसान बनाएगा, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में नए अवसर पैदा करेगा और हमारे सर्विसेज सेक्टर के बीच सहयोग को और प्रबल करेगा। इतना ही नहीं, यह एफटीए भारत और यूरोपियन यूनियन के बीच इन्वेस्टमेंट को बूस्ट करेगा, नई इनोवेशन पार्टनरशिप बनाएगा और वैश्विक स्तर पर सप्लाई चेन को मजबूत करेगा। यानी यह सिर्फ ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट नहीं है, यह साझा समृद्धि का नया ब्लूप्रिंट है। फ्रेंड्स, इस महत्वाकांक्षी एफटीए के साथ साथ हम मोबिलिटी के लिए भी एक नया फ्रेमवर्क बना रहे हैं। इससे भारत के स्टूडेंट्स, वर्कर्स और प्रोफेशनल्स के लिए यूरोपियन यूनियन में नए अवसर खुलेंगे। साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी में हमारा लंबे समय से एक व्यापक सहयोग रहा है। आज हमने इन महत्वपूर्ण लिंकेजेस को भी और मजबूत करने का निर्णय लिया है। फ्रेंड्स, रक्षा और सुरक्षा सहयोग किसी भी स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की नींव होती है और आज हम इसे सिक्योरिटी एंड डिफेंस पार्टनरशिप के जरिए औपचारिक रूप दे रहे हैं। इससे काउंटर टेररिज्म, मैरीटाइम और साइबर सिक्योरिटी में हमारी साझेदारी और गहरी होगी। यह रूल्स बेस्ड इंटरनेशनल ऑर्डर के प्रति हमारी साझा प्रतिबद्धता को भी बल देगा। इंडो पैसिफिक क्षेत्र में हमारे सहयोग का दायरा और बढ़ेगा और इसके साथ हमारी डिफेंस कंपनियां को डेवलपमेंट और को प्रोडक्शन के नए अवसर साकार करेगी। फ्रेंड्स, आज की इन उपलब्धियों के आधार पर हम अगले 5 वर्ष के लिए एक और भी एम्बिशियस और होलिस्टिक स्ट्रेटेजिक एजेंडा लॉन्च कर रहे हैं। एक जटिल वैश्विक वातावरण में ये एजेंडा स्पष्ट दिशा देगा, हमारी साझा समृद्धि को आगे बढ़ाएगा, इनोवेशन को गति देगा, सुरक्षा सहयोग और सुदृढ़ करेगा और पीपल टू पीपल टाइज को और गहरा करेगा। फ्रेंड, भारत और यूरोपियन यूनियन का सहयोग एक पार्टनरशिप फॉर ग्लोबल गुड है। हम इंडो पैसिफिक से लेकर कैरेबियन तक ट्राइलेटरल प्रोजेक्ट को विस्तार देंगे। इससे सस्टेनेबल एग्रीकल्चर, क्लीन एनर्जी और विमेन एम्पावरमेंट को ठोस समर्थन मिलेगा। हम साथ मिलकर आईमैक कॉरिडोर को ग्लोबल ट्रेड और सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट की एक प्रमुख कड़ी के रूप में स्थापित करेंगे। फ्रेंड्स, आज ग्लोबल ऑर्डर में बड़ी उथल-पुथल है। ऐसे में भारत और यूरोपियन यूनियन की साझेदारी अंतर्राष्ट्रीय सिस्टम में स्थिरता को मजबूती देगी। इस संदर्भ में आज हमने यूक्रेन, पश्चिमी एशिया, इंडो-पैसिफिक सहित कई वैश्विक मुद्दों पर विस्तार से चर्चा की। मल्टीलेटरलिज्म और इंटरनेशनल नॉर्म्स का सम्मान हमारी साझी प्राथमिकता है। हम एकमत है कि आज के चैलेंजेस का समाधान करने के लिए ग्लोबल इंस्टीट्यूशंस का रिफॉर्म अनिवार्य है। फ्रेंड्स, राष्ट्रों के संबंधों में कभी-कभी ऐसा क्षण आता है जब इतिहास स्वयं कहता है, यहीं से दिशा बदली, यहीं से एक नया युग शुरू हुआ। भारत की और यूरोपियन यूनियन की यह ऐतिहासिक समिट वही क्षण है। मैं एक बार फिर इस अभूतपूर्व यात्रा के लिए, भारत के प्रति आपकी मित्रता के लिए और हमारे साझा भविष्य के प्रति आपकी प्रतिबद्धता के लिए प्रेसिडेंट कोस्टा और प्रेसिडेंट फॉन डेर लायन का हार्दिक धन्यवाद करता हूं। थैंक यू।
Thank you, sir. Request His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, to give his remarks to the media.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi, my dear friend, dear Ursula, ministers, dear Kaya and Maros, good afternoon. Thank you, dear Prime Minister Modi, for welcoming us on this special occasion. We were privileged yesterday to be your chief guests for the Republic Day celebrations. Such an impressive display of India's capabilities and diversity. Today is a historic moment. We are opening a new chapter in our relations on trade, on security, on people-to-people ties. I'm the president of the European Council, but I'm also an overseas Indian citizen. Then, as you can imagine, for me, it has a special meaning. I'm very proud of my roots in Goa, where my father's family came from. And the connection between Europe and India is something personal to me. Also because we conclude today our trade negotiations. We relaunched at the latest meeting that I had the pleasure to host in May 2021 in my previous capacity. Our summit sends a clear message to the world. At a time when the global order is being fundamentally reshaped, the European Union and India stand together as a strategic and reliable partners. Today, we are taking our partnership to the next level. As the two largest democracies in the world, we are working hand in hand to deliver concrete benefits for our citizens and to shape a resilient global order that underpins peace and stability, economic growth, and sustainable development. I would like to share three messages. First, the European Union and India must work together towards our shared prosperity and security. India is the world's fastest growing major economy. Trade has flowed between our two continents for centuries. And trade is crucial geopolitical stabilizer and the fundamental source of economic growth. Trade agreements reinforce rules-based economic order and promote shared prosperity. That's why today's free trade agreement is of historic importance, one of the most ambitious agreements ever concluded, creating a market of 2 billion people. In a multipolar world, the European Union and India are working together to grow spheres of shared prosperity. But prosperity does not exist without security. Strengthen our cooperation to better protect our citizens and our shared interests. Working together to counter the full range of security threats we face in the Indo-Pacific, in Europe, and around the world, reaching a new level of strategic trust between us. That is the significance of our agreement on a security and defense partnership. The first such overarching defense and security framework between India and the European Union, and the first step towards even more ambitious cooperation in the future. This brings me to my second message. As the world's largest democracies and champions of multilateralism, the European Union and India share the responsibility to upholding the international law with the United Nations Charter at its core. Earlier this morning, we and Ursula and President Ursula had the opportunity to pay tribute to Mahatma Gandhi. And I reflected upon his words, which still hold true today, and I quoted, "Peace will not come out of a clash of arms, but out of justice lived and done by unarmed nations in the face of odds." Our summit reaffirmed our commitment to supporting efforts towards a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine, one that fully respects Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. This is the key moment. We are supporting all efforts to reach a just and sustainable peace. Ukraine has shown its readiness, including at the cost of difficult compromise. I know, dear Prime Minister, that we can count on you to help creating conditions for peace through dialogue and diplomacy. And this is my final message. Together, we must show leadership on global issues. Cooperation between the European Union and India will help shape a more balanced, resilient, and inclusive global order. Just two examples. I'm proud of the commitments we are making for greater cooperation on clean energy, green transition, and climate resilience. And our collaboration through the Global Gateway and on the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor is decisive for global connectivity. By implementing the ambitious Joint Comprehensive Strategic Agenda towards 2030, we will align our priorities with concrete actions for the next 5 years, delivering real benefits to our citizens. Today, we have tangible progress and set an example of cooperative leadership on global issues with our free trade agreement, our security and defense partnership, and our joint strategic agenda. These outcomes are crucial milestones on the longer path. We look forward to continuing the journey together, as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Her Excellency Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, to give her remarks to the media.
Dear Prime Minister Modi, distinguished friend, Antonio, my friend, ministers, especially Shankar and Guyal, Vice President Kallas, Commissioner Šefčovič, Excellencies, friends, thank you very much for the exceptional hospitality we experienced. It was such an honor for us to be your chief guests at the Republic Day yesterday. This is a memory I will carry for a lifetime, because the sense of communion was so powerful. People filled the streets united in pride and joy of belonging to the Indian nation, and rightfully so. India has risen, and Europe is truly glad about it, because when India succeeds, the world is more stable, more prosperous, and more secure, and we all benefit. Prime Minister Modi, dear friend, 1 year ago, the full College of Commissioners came to India. You mentioned it. And this is also a very special memory for me. It showed the seriousness of our intent and the strength of our commitment. Today, we reap the fruits of that commitment with our historic summit. And let me start with trade. Prime Minister, distinguished friend, we did it. We delivered the mother of all deals. We are creating a market of 2 billion people. And this is the tale of two giants